Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ryan Evans, and I'm the Executive Director at Chambers for Innovation and Clean Energy. On behalf of our co-host today, the Toledo Regional Chamber of Commerce and First Solar, I'd like to welcome you all to our Ohio Utility Scale Solar webinar. I would also like to take just a moment to express our to reopen your chambers, businesses, and local economies, and we appreciate that role you're playing in our recovery. Utility scale solar has a unique opportunity at this moment in time to benefit the Ohio economy. The pipeline of utility scale solar projects in Ohio is substantial, as you will soon learn, and will bring billions of dollars in capital investment to the state in the coming years. Furthermore, utility scale solar will bring thousands of jobs, stability for farmers, much needed revenue for rural communities, and of course, clean energy for Ohio residents. I will leave it to our speakers, however, to provide their insight and newly released economic development data for solar in Ohio. We have some great speakers lined up for you today, and I will wrap up my speaking points as quickly as possible so that you can actually hear from them. As part of our meeting today, we have Brian Dicken from the Toledo Regional Chamber of Commerce. Brian will say a few words about his chamber's engagement in the solar industry and introduce our first two speakers, Becky Campbell from First Solar and Jeremy Faust from Fifth Third Bank. Susan Monroe from our organization, Chambers for Innovation and Clean Energy, will then introduce our wrap-up speakers, Mike Volpe from Open Roads Renewables and Gilbert Michaud from Ohio University. Following our speakers, Susan will host a Q&A session for all of you to ask questions. I appreciate our speakers lending their time and expertise to tell the story of potential solar development and economic impact in Ohio from the solar industry, to the approximately 125 people that have joined us today. I would also like to quickly thank Jessica Bergman from our team, who is our webinar host and coordinating our presentations this afternoon. Now just a brief housekeeping moment before I turn the time over to Brian. As I mentioned, there's approximately 125 people who have joined the webinar, and as attendees, presenters will not hear or see you. In order to ask a question, please use the Q&A feature on your Zoom menu. Presenters and the host will see your questions, but other attendees will not. We will be monitoring that section for questions and will address them at the end of the webinar. This webinar is being recorded for possible use in the future. I would now like to turn the time over to our first presenter and co-host, Brian Dicken, IOM, MOD, Vice President of Advocacy and Public Policy at the Toledo Regional Chamber of Commerce, to again say a few words and then turn the time over to Becky and Jeremy when he concludes. Brian, time is yours.
Great, thank you, Ryan. It's certainly a pleasure to be able to co-host this today with you and First Solar. The Toledo Chamber has long been an advocate for an energy policy that really recognizes all forms of production. And we're extremely pleased to be able to be the home of First Solar, which is the largest panel manufacturer in the Western Hemisphere. So not many communities can say that, and we're certainly pleased to do that. So very pleased to be able to introduce two of our presenters this afternoon. Becky Campbell, Manager of Government Affairs at First Solar. She joined the company in 2015 and currently leads the company's legislative and regulatory affairs efforts throughout the eastern half of the U.S. She held roles prior in the company's business and market development teams. She currently serves as a board member of the Solar Energy Industries Association for the Maryland, D.C., Delaware, and Virginia areas. And then I'd also like to introduce Jeremy Faust, Assistant Vice President and Environmental Sustainability Leader at Fifth Third Bank. He leads the bank's efforts to implement environmental sustainability goals and to infuse sustainability into the bank's internal culture. Prior to joining Fifth Third, Jeremy worked as a business development director with the Greater Cincinnati Energy Alliance and Director of Legislative Affairs for the Council in the District of Columbia. He also serves as a board member at Green Umbrella and board chair of the City of Cincinnati's Energy Special Improvement District, their PACE district. He also helped to lead the creation of Solarize Cincinnati, Energize Kentucky, and the Cincinnati 2030 district. So certainly a lot of expertise and background in this, and want to specifically thank both First Solar and Fifth Third for their engagement within the community in a number of projects throughout our region. So, Becky.
Thanks, Brian. So if we go on to the next slide, I think many of you are probably familiar with First Solar. This is just kind of a quick snapshot of who we are. The company, as Brian said, is the largest solar panel manufacturer in the Western Hemisphere. To date, we have produced over 25 gigawatts of solar modules. And we are a partner of choice for both utilities as well as large corporations that are investing in this technology and making the transition to renewable energy. We are very proud to have one of the strongest financial stability and bankabilities in the industry. And if we go on to the next slide, one thing that you may not recognize is that Ohio already is a leader in the solar industry. So First Solar is an Ohio company. We were founded here by an Ohioan, and we've been in the industry, innovating in this space for more than 30 years now. Our technology is what's called a thin film technology, and we again are the only American company to rank among the top 10 largest solar panel companies in the world. 60% of the utility scale solar projects in the US last year used First Solar modules. But we are, I also want to note, while we were founded in Ohio, we are a global company, and we are delivering our projects or our product all over the world now. And in addition to our manufacturing facilities in Ohio, it's also the home to the company's research and development efforts. So if we go on to the next slide, this is just a quick timeline of our history in this market. Again, we were founded by Harold McMaster, an Ohioan, and the company was initially formed in 1990 under the name Solar Cells. We became First Solar in 1999, and we've been ramping our production since then. If we go on to the next slide, our latest major development in Ohio happened in 2018 through 2019. We expanded our existing campus and created a second manufacturing facility about a mile down the road from our original facility in Lake Township. And that new facility helped us triple our US manufacturing capacity. So that project created 500 new full-time jobs with an annual payroll of about $30 million. And it represents a cumulative investment of $1 billion in the Ohio economy. It's a 1 million square foot facility. It's a high-tech manufacturing and excellence center for the company. And we broke ground on that project, I think, in June of 2018, and we officially commissioned it and started manufacturing panels out of it late last year. And if we move on to the next slide, I also want to highlight that we, in addition to kind of our direct manufacturing footprint in Ohio, we work with a large number of supply chain partners in this market, one of which is NSG Pilkington. So And I think one of the things that I wanted to note is that our growth in Ohio is also enabling the growth of some of those supply chain partners, including Pilkington. When we announced our expansion, they similarly announced that they would be standing up a new facility to help support our manufacturing plant. So that investment was about a $250 million investment that was captured in the $1 billion cumulative investment that I noted on the last slide. But that also creates additional jobs, and really the purpose of that facility is to produce new float glass that will supply First Solar's expanded footprint in Ohio. If we move on to the next slide, and maybe the next one after that, we can start to talk about some market trends and what we're seeing in the solar market across the country. So this slide comes from Wood Mackenzie, which is a big market research firm that does a lot of market research in the energy space. And this map is showing that Ohio really is a hotspot right now for utility scale solar development. So if you look at Ohio compared to some of the neighboring states throughout the Midwest, it really stands out as a leader in this emerging market. And if we go to the next slide, we can start to dive into some of the reasons that might be the case. So this is from the U.S. Energy Information Administration, and this just shows over the last decade how electricity generation is trending by source. And so I think it's probably no surprise that coal has been trending down over the last decade pretty steadily, while renewables have been trending upwards, as well as natural gas. And if we go to the next slide, what that's causing is, we're seeing tremendous growth in employment in the solar industry. So right now, solar employs more people than coal and nuclear, and I can say First Solar's Ohio workforce, just at our manufacturing facilities, is upwards of 1,500 associates, which is, I believe, more than both the Davis, Bessie, and Perry nuclear plants combined. If we go to the next slide, I would expect this trend to continue as the market projection for the growth of solar is expected to continue. And so we could expect that the job growth will kind of follow that trend. So this again is from Wood Mackenzie. And really what I wanted to highlight here is the lower darker blue bar in this graph represents utility scale solar. And starting in 2027, we're expecting to see this market segment exceed 50% of the annual new generation for the entire US. And that's expected to continue beyond 2027 indefinitely. If we go to the next slide. What's causing all of this growth? So the bottom line is solar's become very inexpensive. And I know a big point of concern in Ohio, definitely when I'm talking with policymakers, is whether or not solar is subsidized and how the price of solar changes as federal subsidies start to decline. And so I wanted to share this chart. This is from Lazard, and it's part of an annual report that they produce comparing all different electricity generating technologies on an unsubsidized levelized cost of energy. So it's really an apples to apples comparison. What LCOE is the cost per kilowatt hour of production. So it considers just purely, on a production level. And what you see here, if you look at the green arrow, that represents utility scale solar. And so what we're observing today is that the unsubsidized cost of solar is at or below the cost of just about every other form of new energy generation in the country. And then if we go to the next slide to take it a step further, this is also from Lazard, the same study. This looks at solar and wind and compares the levelized cost of energy for new wind and solar versus the marginal cost of existing general conventional generation. And so if you look at the two kind of brownish, orangish colored bars, those represent solar. One is subsidized, one is unsubsidized. And what I really wanted to highlight here is that the cost of solar, whether unsubsidized or subsidized, is pretty much at par or below the cost of operating existing coal plants in the US right now. And while it's not quite at par with existing nuclear facilities, it's getting really close. If we go on to the next slide, and then this is just kind of looking forward where we're expecting to see prices going in the future. And so this looks across different kind of market scales for solar, and the lower bar, kind of the green color, represents utility scale solar. So utility scale is always going to be the lower cost because you're getting economies of scale as you scale projects. And this is, just showing that we're expecting, while we're going to see, a bit of leveling, the downward trend is expected to continue. If we go to the next slide, I think we'll start to talk about, what is this, why Ohio and why now, and what does this all mean? So if we go on, why Ohio? So businesses are increasingly committed to renewable energy. There's a group called the RE100 that Fifth Third and First Solar are both members of. First Solar just is one of the most recent members of this group. And those are groups of large corporations that have made firm commitments to transitioning 100% of their electricity needs to renewable energy. And so I'm sure Jeremy will touch on this a little bit in a couple of minutes, but this is really driving a lot of the growth in utility scale solar. And obviously a lot of these corporations are either located in Ohio already or potentially looking to locate in Ohio, and they want to source renewables close to where they're going to have facilities. If we go on to the next slide. One of the other reasons that we're seeing tremendous demand for renewables right now is because American consumers overwhelmingly support it. So there's a number of studies that kind of touch on this, but the reason I wanted to highlight this one came from the Edison Energy Group, which is the National Trade Association for regulated utilities in the country, large investor-owned utilities. So they did this survey a couple years ago through a market research firm, and they discovered that 74% of consumers in the US think that we should use solar as much as possible. And 70% of the survey participants also agreed that in the near future, we should produce 100% of our electricity from renewable energy. And so, I think, again, I wanted to highlight this because it's not coming from a renewable energy firm or a trade association. This is the Utilities Trade Association that conducted this survey. If we go on to the next slide, I think another driver for the advancement of utility scale solar in Ohio is the fact that Ohio for a while now has been a net energy importer, meaning that Ohioans are consuming more electricity than is actually being produced in the state. And what this means is that all of the job and economic benefits that go along with having energy generation, some of those are being brought in from out of state, meaning other states are reaping the benefits that Ohioans are paying for through their electricity bills. If we move on to the next slide, and this is my final slide. So, time is also of the essence. Again, I know, subsidies are not popular in Ohio, but there is a federal investment tax credit that has been in place for quite some time now, and that has started to step down. Last year, it took its initial step. It will step down further at the end of this year. And then it will take its final step at the end of 2021. So those federal subsidies are rapidly declining. Ohioans are, this is a federal subsidy, so Ohioans are paying into this. But if projects aren't being developed in Ohio, again, it's kind of a missed opportunity. Those tax funds that Ohioans are helping to support, they're benefiting projects that are being developed in other regions of the country. So with that, I will transition it to Jeremy and let him talk a bit about what Fifth Third has been committing to.
Thank you, Becky. Great insight there on the industry and some background of what's going on. Again, I'm Jeremy Faust with Fifth Third Bank. Hopefully most of you are familiar with Fifth Third, but let me share very briefly, and Jessica, if you can jump to the next slide. Fifth Third operates about 1,100 full-service banking centers across our 10-state footprint, roughly between Michigan and Florida. Our headquarters is here in Cincinnati, which is where I am calling in from today. And we certainly appreciate being part of many of the communities that are represented on the call. My primary focus at the bank is developing and implementing a set of operational sustainability goals across our enterprise. Increasingly, we are being asked about, and we're talking about ESG, environmental social governance, as part of our strategy. And I'll talk more about that today because I really think it gets to the why behind the work that we've been able to do in this space. I did spend the first part of my career working in local government, which is actually what brought me into the energy development space. Next slide. So before jumping into Fifth Third's work with solar, let me take a few minutes to talk about ESG, as I think it helps kind of frame this larger question. ESG is really the newest framework for how companies are thinking about fulfilling their responsibility to a multitude of different stakeholders. Fifth Third Bank has a long, committed history of supporting customers, employees, and the local communities in which we serve, but the expectations from each of these groups continues to grow. So when we think about ESG issues, we do so in recognition that our customers and other stakeholders are focused on and care more about these issues than ever before. And of course, we continue to hear interest from employees as well about how they want us to respond as their employer, wanting us to impact the community in a positive way that goes beyond our core business. We also see this growing transparency in this space, which are enabling all these different stakeholders to differentiate between companies. So people are making these very deliberate choices about who they do business with and who they associate themselves with. So we need to be aware of these needs and concerns. Next slide. And to be clear, these growing expectations are not only coming from employees and local communities, they're coming directly from our shareholders. So some comments here from T. Rowe Price, BlackRock, and Invesco. which collectively own about 1/5 of all Fifth Third Bank stock. BlackRock may be the best known among those making these bold ESG statements about environmental sustainability in particular. BlackRock is the world's largest asset manager and has been one of the growing voices in this space. Their CEO continues to point out that climate change is invariably one of the top issues that their clients around the world raise with BlackRock. So these are the new voices kind of urging action in the sustainability arena, not just the fringe segment of diehard environmentalists anymore. And as you can imagine, it would be very difficult for us to ignore these voices. So whether this is kind of a fad or it's a permanent feature of our new economy, the profile on ESG issues is relevant at the highest levels, which is part of why Fifth Third is not only engaging these issues more, but is continually working to get out front on these matters. Next slide is an excerpt from our environmental sustainability policy. As you'll see here, our organization is committed to being a leader in this space. And again, this ties into our longstanding commitment to build strong communities, to serve our customers, and to be that one bank that people most value and trust. We see this as part of the way we are building that value and trust with our next segment of customers. Next slide is talks a little bit about this progression. In 2017, we adopted 5 bold sustainability targets that we committed to achieve by 2022. These were reductions to energy, water, greenhouse gas emissions, and waste. We also made a 100% renewable power commitment, recognizing the growing movement towards renewables. We wanted to purchase 100% renewable power for our organization to account for the total power generation across our entire operational footprint. And the next slide shows what we've been able to do in these past few years, as we've already accomplished 3 of our 5 goals: our water reduction goal, our greenhouse gas emission reduction goal, and our renewable power goal. The next slide talks a little bit kind of about how we got there on the solar front. Achieving these goals took a lot of kind of focus internally. Having set out this 100% renewable power commitment, we knew we needed a bold solution to achieve this goal within our 5-year time frame. Fortunately, there were several options for how we might go about doing this, and the one we targeted was the use of the power purchase agreement. The next slide explains this a little bit. PPAs have become very popular in the corporate space over the last 5 years. This is a large reason that so many companies have made renewable power commitments. These are long-term contracts between a renewable energy developer and a dedicated, creditworthy buyer. When the buyer, such as Fifth Third, commits to purchase renewable energy from the developer, typically from a specific project that's under development, it enables the developer to secure financing and actually construct the project. So the buyer gets a dedicated source of renewable power at a specified rate over the long term. And this is exactly what we did. The next chart, which is courtesy of the Renewable Energy Buyers Alliance, shows the growth in power purchase agreements over the past 5 years. Sorry that this one's a little hard to read. The text is small, I know. But hopefully you can see that each year is divided into individual projects, companies that are entering specific renewable power PPA deals. So you see a lot from some of the large tech firms, but you also see a growing list of smaller companies that are making renewable power commitments and looking to achieve those goals. Next slide. So in March of 2018, Fifth Third announced that we had entered into one of these PPA agreements. The project developer we engaged was Sun Energy One, and the project site was down in northeastern North Carolina, unfortunately not here in Ohio. To account for our entire power load, the project was built to more than 80 megawatts, which was projected to generate more than 200,000 megawatt hours of renewable power annually. The graphic at the right shows some of the offsets, the number of cars taken off the road based on this project. On the left is our project announcement. We did an announcement in tandem with the NASDAQ and the opening of trading on March 7th, 2018. Fifth Third was the first Fortune 500 company to achieve 100% renewable power through a single solar project. So something fun to celebrate with the team. The next slide is a picture of the project itself, which has now been up and running over a year. This is kind of the final product, but there's a tremendous amount of project development work that goes into these projects. Even for someone like myself who has worked in this space for years, watching the land preparation, the installation work was really a sight. A lot of construction activity, a lot of machinery, all of which of course helps drive local economic development in the community. So according to the local chamber in Ahoskie, North Carolina, which is in Hertford County where this project was developed, the development of the project resulted in significant economic growth as well as new tax revenue for the community, unlike they had seen in quite a while. The chamber noted that lodging rates increased 28%, retail spending increased 14% during the 2-year construction period, with many of the construction workers staying on and working in the area, and state tax receipts and local sales tax receipts each increased by about 4%. And we're certainly pleased to be associated with such impacts. This project has brought a lot of attention to our efforts. It's given us a platform to talk about our sustainability efforts and what we're trying to achieve, how we're trying to support the community. And this was a great showcase way to be able to do that. The final slide I'll end with is a quick snapshot of our latest sustainability goal numbers. I'll make sure to leave time for questions, and I will pass it back to Susan Monroe for the next steps.
Hey, I wanted to thank Becky, and I wanted to make sure to let our attendees know that it was actually just announced that Verizon has actually entered a power purchase agreement with First Solar for their Madison County project in Ohio. So that's great news, and congratulations to First Solar. And Jeremy, thank you for telling the Fifth Third story. We hope if the time comes where you need other renewable energy projects, that Ohio will be ready for you this time, and I think we will be. So also with Fifth Third's presence and commitment to Ohio, Fifth Third is certainly an example to other financial institutions in the state and other employers for that matter. Next up we have Mike Volpe with Open Road Renewables. Mike is a renewable energy expert with over a decade of experience spanning project development and finance. Mike is also co-founder and vice president at Open Road Renewables, a utility scale solar development company that has been active in Ohio for actually 5 years. We look forward to hearing from Mike, who's really going to take a deeper dive. We've heard maybe a state perspective, a corporate perspective, but now we're going to dig in local to what's the local benefit, what does local development look like, and what's in it for me as a chamber director and an economic development director as we start to work with solar developments in the state. Mike, welcome.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Mike Volpe, and I will try and answer a few questions that may be on your mind. I think why Ohio and why now have already been answered. Why now? The install cost of solar has come down 80% over the last 10 years. A corollary that I often use is flat screen TVs. A decade ago, your rich friend who liked to spend money had a flat screen TV, but now you go down to Walmart and you get a flat screen TV for a few $100. Why now? Fortune 500s, as we've heard, colleges, universities are all interested in renewable procurement. So the question that may be out there is, what steps are taken to identify a new site and engage with the local community? Let me frame up why Ohio is having sort of a groundswell of development. In addition to those drivers, Ohio has 10 million acres of tillable farmland and an extremely robust transmission system. Those two things make Ohio a great area for solar project development. The transmission system are the overhead power lines that historically have run from coal plants on the riverbanks to the city centers. Well, those lines now have new injection capacity because those coal plants are retiring. and they run across farmland. So the very first thing that we do is we look at the transmission system and we look at which lines have room for additional injection capacity. If there's injection capacity and there's tillable land underneath it with low population density, we will then engage with the local county and request the GIS data layer to understand who owns the parcels that are sitting underneath the transmission line. And then just sort of the old-fashioned way, we put a letter in the mail that says, we haven't had the fortune to meet, but we are actively scouting a project in this area, and your 200-acre farm may be a candidate. Would you be interested in learning more? Here are the lease rates that we can offer. Here's how it works. Here's a flyer, etc. Once we begin to engage with the local landowners, it's really a nice, steady education process where we learn about their interests in their farm, they learn about solar projects, and what we find is there's a few common refrains. Folks want to keep the farm in the family, but it's tough to do it. As y'all all know, in these rural communities, being a farmer has become very, very difficult, especially, if you only have a few hundred acres. If you're one of the mega farmers that has thousands of acres, then maybe you have the scale to do it. But these family farms, it's tough to keep them going. There's so much heritage in that. The commodity fluctuation, the weather, all of these things make farming quite a volatile business. So what we see sometimes is folks say, I'm interested and I'd like to put half of my acreage into solar, keep half of it in productive ag land. That approach acts as a hedge to commodity fluctuations, and it allows the family farm to stay in the family and be something that creates enough income for their family. Also, there's always a conversation of, well, tell me more about the panels. Are they going to leach into the ground? No. Simply put, panels don't leach. What are the concerns about stormwater runoff? Well, that's a great question. We'll do a lot of investigative work about the existing drain tile, and we'll agree to conditions that during the installation process, if we puncture drain tile, that we'll then have to replace it. Well, I'm really good friends with all my neighbors, and I don't want to piss them off. We hear that. This is the community that you live in. What about planting a row of natural species around the perimeter such that over time it grows in and provides a vegetative buffer, so that as opposed to looking at cornfields or soybeans, they would be looking at evergreens along the perimeter. These are the things that the conversations that we have very, very early in the process as landowners are contemplating whether signing up for the solar project is good for them. And from there, it's probably about 3 years of investigative work where there's an effort to bring multiple different parcels and families together to establish a project footprint. Once the project footprint has been established, there are then experts that are hired by the way of threatened and endangered species, geotechnical investigation, cultural and historic review, studying the transmission system formally with the transmission utility and PJM. And then once you've crossed all of those items off, you submit a permit to the Ohio Power Siting Board. The way that the rules are written in Ohio, projects bigger than 50 megawatts, which is mainly what we're talking about here, go through a state level process because there's technical experts at the Power Siting Board that really know this stuff in and out, but it creates the opportunity for significant local engagement, both formally and informally. Informally by way of the 2 local hearings and the opportunity to submit comments to the docket, formally by becoming a formal intervener in it. The siting board process results in technical investigation into the concerns that are raised, and then the imposition of conditions that say, if you're going to build a project, then you need to do this. If you're going to operate the project, you need to do this. Some of the common permit conditions that are imposed on projects for the construction operation are a vegetative screening plan, drain tile management plan, a bonded decommissioning plan, a road use and maintenance agreement plan to ensure that if there's construction activity on the local roads, that's repaired. From that point, once the permit is issued, you're probably 12, 18, 24 months away from construction start. And that's when the process of workforce development really takes hold. There is a desire from everyone in the development community to bring good jobs to the local communities. The jobs range from really technical electrical engineering, civil engineering, project finance, attorneys, etc., to a day laborer who may be in her first day on the job putting panels onto racking, and then from there will move up the rung and learn how the wires go together, and from there run the trenching, etc. There are tremendous technical jobs that come with solar project installation. For the local communities, for the local counties, school districts, townships, there is tremendous windfall tax benefits. For example, the 200 megawatt Hillcrest project that we developed down in Brown County will generate $1.8 million per year in local tax revenue. $1.8 million. That's 20 times the tax revenue that these ag parcels would otherwise generate. And there's no additional services. There's no kids to educate. There's no water or sewer to run. It's all a net benefit to the local county. Of that 1.8 million per year of the Hillcrest project, roughly $1 million goes to local schools. There's also a partnership with higher education. The Hillcrest project has a partnership with Southern States Community College there in Hillsborough. That partnership has a funding amount where the project actually funds an educational program and it allows for tours of students. And then let's talk about jobs. The way that the rules are written, 80% of the workforce has to be from Ohio domicile workers. And you're going to hear staggering numbers of the job potential from Gilbert here in a minute. At least 80% of those jobs come from folks in the state. During this tough time where we're all struggling as a result of COVID, people are getting laid off, it's really not fair. And some areas of the state are hurting more than others. Some rural communities, folks are out of work. Well, when the solar project comes to town, it almost doesn't matter what your skill set is. There's going to be a job there for you. So the opportunity for folks at the Chambers of Commerce and economic development agencies is to partner up with the projects and make sure that the best local candidates have their boots on the ground on the project site. I guess just a final point on the tax revenue. The tax revenue is guaranteed to come every year that the project operates at a prescribed amount. There's something known as the payment in lieu of taxes, and that's an agreement that the project enters into with the local county commissioners. And that establishes that funding amount so that every year the project's operating, county commissioners, school board, township, they can bank on that money coming. All while serving the interest of the Fortune 500s, working to develop in-state jobs, and by the way, transitioning to power generation sources that don't have air or water emissions. So I sincerely appreciate the opportunity to share a little bit about the development process, and as we transition from early stage development to construction start, how we can strengthen the partnership to really maximize the local economic benefits. At this point, I would like to turn it over to Gilbert Michaud, professor at Ohio University, who's going to share an overview of a recent economic impact analysis he did for the state of Ohio. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Mike, and hi, everyone. As Mike mentioned, my name is Gilbert Michaud. I am a faculty member at the Voinovich School of Leadership and Public Affairs at Ohio University. We were pleased to be asked by USEC, the Utility Scale Solar Energy Coalition, of which Mike's firm is a part of, to do this study entitled Measuring the Economic Impacts of Utility Scale Solar in Ohio. Next slide, please. This work fit really well with a lot of the stuff that me and my team are doing around energy transitions in Ohio. I won't go into the details here, but you know, it's been interesting to see a lot of new solar projects you know, be approved and you know, pending with the Power Siting Board in Ohio. cost declines. We heard from Becky and Jeremy and Mike about business demand for renewables, corporate sustainability missions, et cetera, which is exciting. And so basically USEC said, hey, Gilbert, for the first time ever, we know that you have done some projects for specific developers. We have a sort of a good grasp on project by project, economic, workforce, tax related impacts, et cetera. However, for the first time, can we sort of look at a higher level and more comprehensive, aggregate economic, tax related impacts of these big utility scale projects being constructed in Ohio, which is kind of our research question, if you will. Next slide, please. Here's the power siting board map. Not to spend too much time here, just give you a visual snapshot of where these projects are being constructed and proposed. Kind of an observation. A lot of them are in the southwest, if you will, quadrant of the state, but we've been seeing them pop up in other portions of the state as well. Next slide, please. And again, business demand for renewables has been a key driver for these projects, especially here in central Ohio. We're thinking about data centers and the Facebooks and Amazons and Googles of the world that have renewables goals, as well as many other companies. Next slide, please. Okay, let's frame some of this stuff. When we think about economic impacts, it's really important to be sort of good consumers of these data. And it's important to understand that we can break this down into three central categories: direct effects, indirect effects, and induced effects. So direct effects, if we think about like the construction of a solar facility, for instance, we're thinking boots on the ground, folks who are, electrical engineers, project managers, folks that are out in the fields building the project. Our indirect effects, conversely, is sort of our supply chain and vendors, material suppliers, and those types of folks. And then our induced effect is those folks are spending their disposable income in a regional or state economy on groceries, restaurants, et cetera. And so when we sum all of these things together, this is what we term as the total economic impact in terms of like jobs, for instance. The slides that I'll show you subsequently will be the total figures, but again, want you to understand this very clearly. And then the other thing, if you look to the right-hand side of your screen, is sort of the project development process and how we can break this down into two sort of central phases, if you will, sort of our construction phase in terms of procurement and transportation and actually installing the panels and connecting it to the grid. And then once it's connected and generating electricity, we move to what we call our operations and maintenance, or O&M phase of the project. And so I'll be displaying numbers from both of those phases. Next slide, please. Not to get too far into tools and methods, I'd encourage folks to read through the methodology section of our report. We utilize JEDI, which is a pretty common tool from NREL, the National Renewable Energy Lab, and make some required updates to that tool. We also have software at the university called Implan, which is a economic impact software that we use and pay for. We make a few assumptions, one-axis tracking systems. Mike just talked about the 80% Ohio labor. We also assume 30% Ohio materials are used. And what's really important here is that we model three distinct deployment scenarios. A low scenario of 2.5 gigawatts, which is very feasible if we think back to that power siting board map a few slides ago. All the projects that are in the power siting board queue right now sum to over 3 gigawatts, actually. So if a lot of those get approved and constructed, our low scenario is more than feasible over the next few years here. A moderate scenario of 5 gigawatts, and then an aggressive scenario of 7.5 gigawatts. Next slide, please. So let's first talk about construction phase employment, jobs. Again, on the left side of the screen, you can see the more granular breakdown, as I mentioned, per those categories of effect. On the right-hand side, perhaps is the more interesting piece where we sum this. And what we observe through our models and our low, moderate, and aggressive scenarios, respectively, for our construction phase is 18,039 jobs, 36,074, and then 54,113 jobs in our most aggressive scenario, again, in the construction phase. Next slide, please. Looking at economic impacts, again, still in this construction phase. Again, totals are on the right-hand side of the screen. Those numbers per our modeling is $3.2 billion in our low scenario, 6.4 billion in our moderate, and 9.6 billion, almost $10 billion of dollars flowing into Ohio's economy in the 7.5 gigawatt deployment scenario. Next slide, please. Let's take a look at O&M. These are annual numbers, just to be very clear. Jobs are sort of inherently lower here as par for the course. You know, one of the efficiencies of solar is once it's constructed, we need less folks sort of out on the site. Again, looking at our low, moderate, and aggressive scenarios, we find 207 jobs at 2.5 gigawatts, 413 at 5 gigawatts, and 618 O&M jobs at 7.5 gigawatts. Next slide. Again, O&M phase economic impacts. Again, these are annual values. Just to be very clear, $54 million in our low scenario, 107 million and 160 million in our moderate and aggressive scenarios, respectively. Next slide, please. And perhaps a better way to think of this is where we aggregate over the life of the solar system's economic impacts, right? So we basically make the assumption that these facilities will be operating for 40 years, multiply those annual figures by 40 to come up with sort of our aggregate total economic impacts over the life of the systems of $2.2 billion, $4.3 billion, and $6.4 billion across our three scenarios, respectively. Next slide. As Mike mentioned, we have this pilot program in Ohio. Basically, county commissioners can leverage up to $9,000 per megawatt that will be fed directly into local schools and health systems and libraries and other things of that nature. Really important boost to a lot of these rural communities across Ohio that might be struggling with economic transitions anyway, and now the health pandemic as well. Annual tax revenues from this program are on the left-hand side of your screen. On the right-hand side, again, you can see over the life of the system's 40 years, almost $1 billion in our low scenario, and then 1.8 billion and 2.7 billion dollars respectively in our moderate and aggressive scenarios. Really important piece of this story. Next slide, please. And then finally, we also looked at some solar production estimates, and we said, okay, what are the megawatt hours generated across these three scenarios, and what does that mean in terms of equivalent homes powered? What we found basically, and I'm rounding a bit here, is 500,000 homes, 1 million homes, and 1.5 million homes powered across our three potential scenarios. And to give you a better sort of frame of mind of what that might mean in practice is that in our aggressive scenario of 7.5 gigawatts, the energy produced could power all the households in Ohio's largest city, Columbus, about 4 times over. So we're talking about a lot of electricity here. Next slide, please. So I went a little quickly, but the report is linked here. You can see a snapshot of the cover page. We also made a really cool one-pager that's a higher level synthesis of our key findings and data, which is also at that link. And really excited to roll out this report and share it with the world this week, and hope that folks will take a read. And if folks have questions, my email address is at the bottom as well. So thank you. And with that, I will turn it back over to our moderator.
Hey, Mike, Gilbert, thank you very much. And the Toledo Blade actually came out with an article today, and there's this great quote from Stephen Crum from the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers. He had this to say about solar job creation in Ohio. We are ready to put our boots on and go to work. Let's make this happen. So Gilbert, thank you for being with us today and sharing that great economic data. We do, I think we're going to take one quick question. For those questions that we do not get to today, we will answer you personally, and that answer will come from our panelists. We had a question regarding going back to job creation. It's a great question. How long can we expect those construction jobs to last, and what other type of permanent jobs would there be following construction? So I will let Gilbert, Mike, Becky take that. Mike, you want to take it?
I'm happy to. Hey guys, Mike Volpe with Open Road again. The general construction phase lasts about 12 months. And we were actually sitting with the IBEW in a legislator meeting, and somebody said, well, you know, is that good that somebody will come in and work on a job for 12 months and then they'll no longer have employment? The response was that individual, that young worker who may not have a certain set of technical skills, will go down the road and build the Kroger in the local community. And then they'll go build the fire station. Or if they have a certain skill set for solar, they can then travel to the next project area. What you're seeing is that there's actually sort of a sun belt starting west of Dayton and swooping down east of Cincinnati and then south of Columbus, where the majority of the solar development is taking place because it has the strongest solar resource. So there's a bit of a cluster. And then if you think about topography, eastern Ohio has more topography, which makes it challenging for solar. So with that, the normal construction phase is about 12 months, and those jobs will last about 12 months. But there's plenty of opportunity to continue taking steps forward in your career once you work on a solar project.
And I'd also say real quick that our modeling, assumes that we acknowledge that when we're summing projects that equate to our scenarios of gigawatts of deployment, we understand looking toward the future that these projects will sort of be staggered. And as more projects get approved and start construction, that will enhance the opportunity for folks to sort of bounce back and forth even between projects.
That's great. I think we have time maybe for one more question. We had anything else related to during construction and how you plan to use the land where the panels are installed? Any opportunity to use that land for anything else like pollinators or anything else like that?
I'm happy to start on this, and I suspect that Mike might want to chime in as well. Becky with First Solar again. Absolutely, Susan. So increasingly, we're seeing planting of pollinators around the perimeter of project sites. And I think Mike made mention of this, helps adjacent farms. If there are adjacent farms, it increases pollinators around the project site. And then also we're seeing a lot of sheep grazing on solar plants. So, this is a way to also help maintain the property while also providing, a source of opportunity for local farmers if they have sheep. And I emphasize sheep. Goats are not necessarily good grazers at solar projects because they tend to climb and chew. But the industry has seen really good experience with sheep. And if maybe I can send this to you to pass along to attendees. There's a utility in Florida that has set up what they call a lamb cam, so that you can watch the sheep grazing at their sites, and it's pretty entertaining.
That's great. Yeah, I would love to have that information, and I will pass that on to everyone. So I want to really make sure to thank our panelists. Thank you for your time in prepping for today, and thank you for your energy and commitment to moving solar forward in Ohio. And I want to thank our attendees for your time today. And I think we all look forward to supporting solar. I think we see it as a pathway to helping to rebuild our states and our local economy. You can view today's webinar on our website tomorrow, along with some other materials from today. And we are going to close out, and we're going to leave you with this short 44-second video. Thank you, everyone.